Let me start with the way that I build lists is very chaotic. I tend to usually start with one good concept, and then I'll build from there.
Few people in this world can go by one name, and especially in the Warhammer community, there are very few. This particular one is Wallace. Maybe some know him as Mr. Warphammer, even though he didn't start that. That's where I've known him from. He has been an inspiration in list creation for a long time, for me, probably a few people out there as well, and became famous on the internet for revealing some of the chaos leaks that were coming out last year. I wanted the chance to sit down with him and discuss the list he took to Cherokee last weekend and came 11th with Death Guard, an army that has been seen as something that's not actually going to achieve anything at the moment, but he once again proved it wrong, took Death Guard and Nurgle demons to a huge achievement. So here's Wallace, really an amazing guy, and I hope you enjoy. Firstly, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate this, and you don't realise how much of a shame to say, almost like fanboy I am of the stuff you've done. I first, as a kind of mini introduction for anyone that is going to be watching this, I first discovered you as Mr. Warphammer when you spoke with obviously your friend about your Zinch demon list and how you took down, I think it was 3 Megara Knights with treason of Zinch. And
That is truly, yeah, that's truly one of my that's still my top hobby moment. There's been a few that are close, but that's definitely been my top hobby moment of all time, like in an actual game, completely unforced.
It was amazing, and I'll be honest, the next day I went out and bought a load of change and a Be'lakor and started a Demon's Army.
That's awesome.
Fully invested. And I've been switching it up. So the last video was with Brent Simon, and we discussed Pure Zinch, and I've just been going down that route for a while now, and obviously following along when you so famously, I think I discussed this on a more private sense when you were streaming Hearthstone a while back, and I was chatting to you on there about how it was that you were leaking this in quotes leaking this content, and how the kind of community felt about that. So I would really love to talk to you about that. Also,
sure.
Also how you managed to take Death Guard this weekend to the Cherokee thing, which from everything I've read online and talking to friends who play Death Guard, everyone's convinced Death Guard is dead and there's nothing they can do. And you came like 11th out of a huge number. I think you literally just missed the top bracket, which was obviously a massive shame, but extremely impressive at the same time. So I'd love to hear about your experience doing that and how that list went as well.
Of course. Where would you like to start today?
Let's start with your list from Cherokee, because there was some interesting bits in there. I noticed you had the Demon Prince that from the Nurgle side that was I've never seen run.
Mamon, Mamon Transfigured. Yeah. So let me start with the way that I build lists is very chaotic. I tend to usually start with one good concept, and then I'll build from there. So the concept really was that I liked -1 damage into specifically Astra Militarum. -1 damage is very impactful in that matchup because they rely very heavily on their Leman Russ, and the most common variant of Leman Russ takes their 3 damage plasma guns. So I was like, well, I want things with -1 damage, but specifically I want big things with -1 damage, if possible. So I was looking at what options that Chaos had, and the Plagueburst Crawler has, for a very long time, notably been one of the better units in Chaos, period. It's very undercosted at 145. It's super good into Space Marine bodies because it has a volume of damage to shooting, and its entropy cannons can wreck just about any vehicle in the game if you spike a few rolls. So I was starting with the concept of, okay, the Plagueburst Crawler is good in the current meta, but that's an individual data sheet in a larger faction, and it's not as easy to soup anymore with Arcs of Omen. So I initially kind of put the pin in that idea when I was going through options for different lists I could play. Part of what I've been thinking about a lot is how present I thought Astra Militarum would be in the current meta. I was completely wrong. The breakdown for the event was very Space Marine centric, which I anticipated, but there was also a bunch of Custodes. And so there was a bit more of a mix of factions I didn't expect to be as highly represented at Cherokee. And I didn't actually get, out of all my 6 games, a single Astra Militarum matchup, which, it happens. So
it could have completely gone the opposite way, where you had every single one being that. So yeah, it's good to be prepared for variety.
Right. So I took the concept, which is Plagueburst Crawlers good, because they are good into Space Marines as well, because they have a lot of volume of damage to shooting, which obviously is good into Space Marine bodies. And I built a list around there, and my goal of my list is how can I make myself as favored as possible into the Astra Militarum matchup without sacrificing, mission play into other factions. So I had a couple of concepts I wanted to try to implement, which is I wanted to see how good behind enemy lines was with Death Guard specifically. So I brought a couple of units that were there almost entirely either for scoring on despoiled ground, which is one of our secondaries, or for behind enemy lines. And those were the Death Guard Terminator, the Deathshroud Terminator unit.
Yeah, 3 of those?
Yep, just one 3-man unit that I threw into the list. I was like, that's a great unit for behind enemy lines on some missions. And other missions, it can just do actions or despoiled ground. They're a nice unit. They're very expensive at 150 points to do what I was doing with them, but I figured that was a worthwhile investment. And in most games, they did score me quite a few victory points. And I must say that in the event, I think I collectively dropped 6 or 7 victory points across on secondaries across all 6 games. I could be forgetting something, but yeah, I had no issues with secondaries with the way I built my list.
That's really impressive.
I thought that concept worked out pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other side of it was Spread the Sickness as an obvious take it always, Death Guard secondary, and then Fleeting Vectors, which is our one where it's like kill 7 models, kill them with plague weapons, and have people fail morale. Super easy secondary when you have 3 Plagueburst Crawlers that do not require line of sight for their shooting. The concept was good secondary play that I would build into my list, and I designed it very intentionally to do very well into Astra Militarum. And I put in a few things here and there to help with the Space Marine matchup as well, which I did face quite a few. So that leads me on to the rest of the list. So we took 3 Plagueburst Crawlers, and I took Mamon Transfigured, the Forge World Demon Prince for Nurgle. Yes. And I put him into a patrol detachment with 2 units of Nurglings and some Plaguebearers. Plaguebearers were also a nice unit to threaten behind enemy lines that would deep strike them in most games. Worst case scenario, I would drop them onto one of my back objectives just to hold it or to raise a banner or something. Nurglings are great with forward deploy. It stops a lot of factions that have pre-game moves, and it can also block out Space Marine infiltrators from positioning onto the center of the board at the start of the game.
That was my first thought when I saw them in there. It's like, that's an instant, because it's likely to be so many Space Marines out there. That's a huge hit, yeah.
Yeah, so I wouldn't leave home without a Demons detachment and Death Guard. I know other people disagree with me there. I think it's essential, especially for the way I like to play the game, and I like to play very mission-oriented. So I threw those in. Mamon's big thing is that he gives an aura of reroll 1s to Nurgle demons. It's got the old keyword, which matters because Plagueburst Crawlers are Nurgle demons. So now all my Plagueburst Crawlers get reroll 1s, which helps a lot with the math. Yeah, because like the math on Plagueburst Crawlers against like another, as an example, the guard matchup was like, it was very swingy, but I didn't quite kill 7 models on average with the 3 of them. But with Mamon Transfigured giving rerolls, now instead of just hitting on 4s without line of sight, I'm hitting on 4s rerolling 1s, which is pretty cute. So in a lot of ways, he almost acted like a a fourth Plagueburst Crawler, and that he increased their efficiency. He also he's a little melee dude. He hangs out in your backfield and kind of bullies people off your objectives, which mattered a lot in some of my matchups. Specifically in my matchup against Blood Angels, he was big there. He actually killed Dante in that game.
Wow.
As well as in my matchup against, ironically, Disciples of Be'lakor, which I played in round 4. That was a match that I had a lot of fun with. But he got into my backfield, and thankfully Mamon was able to push all the stuff off the objective, but my opponent was very wisely like catapulting units just into my deployment zone and denying me a lot of points on primary. It was a really scary game, but Mamon helped me clutch it out. He was really big in that matchup. And he has like a nice...
Do you think
nice
facing
flamer
against demons like that list, you find it not necessarily like easier, but because you really understand that army and how that works, it's just an easier process for you?
Oh, absolutely. Like if I didn't know to screen out the Shrouded Steps, and if I didn't know to kind of screen in 2 layers against the leadership shenanigans, if I didn't know how threatening some of the units he had, like the Fiends, were, it would have changed my priority in playing the game a lot. But even having known everything that he was doing, there's sometimes that you can't stop it. And so I was actually down about 35 victory points going into the 5th battle round because my opponent, very good player, his name is Josh, he was catapulting things into my lines to deny me points starting on turn 2 and moving forward. And it was on Tide of Conviction, so it's really easy in that matchup, if you're fast, to deny your opponent points on the primary. And since I was slower moving and had to dedicate my resources pretty early, which I'll get to in a second, I couldn't actually get up the field and start scoring points until the later turns of the game. I swung it on the last turn. I was able to get 16 points on the primary by covering literally every objective. I tabled him, which got me 3 points on Fleeting Vectors. I got my last Spread the Sickness I needed, and I got 15 points on Despoiled Ground. And if I missed any one of those steps, it would have either been a tie or a loss. So it was a tight game. But my opponent was a really good sport. He made one critical mistake in our game, which was that he put Be'lakor too far forward too early. He really disrespected my damage output.
Right.
So pretty much I threw 4 CP at him. I threw 2 Poxwalker units and a Plague Marine unit at him, and I gave the Plague Marine unit the Eternal Hatred for the +1 to wound, and I threw the Plague Skull of Golgotha at him for some extra mortal wounds, and I threw I threw a Smite at him. I literally rolled all of my dice at Be'lakor, and I killed him by literally 1 wound. So there was a 1 wound worth of overkill, and that was the last dice I could have rolled. So if it didn't work out that way and Be'lakor lived, I was in a terrible spot, but barely inched it out by rolling literally an entire list at it.
But you could say you had it almost mathematically perfect then if you literally had 1 wound over.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like the difference of like he failed 2 of my Plague Knife saves. Right. Yeah. So it was a tight game. So I don't regret that. Also, I will mention now that part of my goal going into that event was not to win the event. I don't have delusions of that. I'm always open to the possibility of making the cut and doing well. But I designed this Death Guard list with the intention of playing Death Guard, 1, because I hadn't played them in pretty much all of 9th edition at an event. I've only ever played them in practice games, and I wanted to be able to say that before a new edition came out that I played every Chaos Army. The second reason is the models that I have for Death Guard are beautifully painted. They're the nicest ones that I have. So I wanted to get the hobby overall score, the Rain Man score. I think they're calling it Hobby Paragon now. It's like get the highest paint score and the highest play score, which I did manage to lock in, which was super awesome.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, I feel very good about that. So the judges agreed they liked my paint, which made me happy. And that's also unironically part of the reason I brought the Terrax-Pattern Assault Drill. It's not bad. It does stuff in game. It was actually probably my 3rd best data sheet by the end of the tournament. It just kept doing crazy stuff. The universe loved the Terrax.
Oh, fantastic.
Like the Belticon, they'd always...
I saw the Rhino
Yeah,
in there and I was like, Rhino? Yeah, that's kind of expected. And then suddenly it was this drill.
yeah, so the drill does some funny stuff. My main thing was I put 10 Plague Marines in the Biologus Putrifier with Arch-Contaminator in it. And then what it did is, like, the Plague Marines would come out. The Terrax had 5 Meltaguns worth of shooting itself, plus 2 Flamers. The squad inside had 2 Meltaguns that they got as free upgrades.
Nice.
So it was 7 Meltaguns between the 2 of them. Plus, there's a whole combination of strats you can do called, I think it's Overwhelming Generosity and the Blightning. And that 2 CP combo allows your Plague Marines to throw grenades as if they were pistols, and it's like 6 shots each, but you can only throw 3 of them. So essentially it makes your Plague Marine squad do 18 random shots at strength 4. But the Biologus Putrifier upgrades those to be AP 1 damage 2 shots, and since they're plague weapons with Arch-Contaminator, you get full rerolls. So it's a really silly little 2 CP combo that makes your Plague Marine squad very good at shooting, which is hilarious. And in combat, those grenades also auto-hit, which is also hilarious and came up in my game against demons because the Plague Marine squad managed to, in melee, nuke 2 Beasts to Nurgle, which was hilarious with that.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's a pretty funny meme combo.
From the
I was
drill charging you in.
Right. Yeah, the drill comes up, it pops out, it puts a bunch of dice at your opponent. It's an unironically decent amount of shooting. And then sometimes the drill makes the charge, and I get to go, drill, 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 and roll my, like, 3 attacks that hit on 4s, but they're, like, randomly strength 14, AP 4, damage, like, 6 plus D3 if you're a vehicle for some reason. It's just amazing. I love that model. It was a lot of fun. And, it was nicely painted, so... that factored obviously into the hobby score, which was the goal of this event. So it was a lot of fun. I think Death Guard has a place in the meta. I don't think they're as bad as people say. My one loss was into Dark Angels, which is a tough matchup for better at math than you are. But I had a chance into it, and the person I was playing was the person that inevitably won the event, Stephen Crawley.
Right.
So my only chance against him is to just smack him with so many mortal wounds that his Terminator blob can't recover, because he won the priority roll-off for terrain. He put a big terrain piece in the middle, and then he got the first turn and advanced all his Terminators into it. So I was like, okay, how do I deal with this? Because I can't really see the Terminators, and they're all in light cover, so my Plagueburst Crawlers couldn't do anything. So I was like, the only way I can win this game is if I spike mortals. So I had my Malignant Plaguecaster move up the table with a bunch of Poxwalkers, and I got the Poxwalkers into combat, and I threw the Plague Skull of Golgoth. So essentially, the big other meme combo that my list had, because I like them, I like having silly combos, was Mutant Strain with Wrath of the Dead or something like that. It's a 1 CP strat for the Death Company I was bringing called Harbingers. That combo gives you full hit rerolls, and every 6 to hit does 1 mortal wound. So with 40 attacks from your Poxwalkers, it averages out to about 13 mortal wounds when they swing, which is crazy.
If you had the rerolls, were you trying to fish for them as well?
Yeah, you just fish for 6s. So I got the Poxwalker into combat with the Dark Angel Terminators, and in my mind, I'm like, I need to kill these down to like 1 or 2, and if I do that, then everything works out. So essentially, I had to do like 20 mortal wounds that turn or whatever. So I threw the Plague Skull. It only did a couple mortals, which sucks. I mean, it's very spiky. Sometimes it overkills, sometimes it doesn't. And then the Poxwalkers went off, and I rolled them in 2 volleys of attacks. I rolled the first 20 and then the next 20. The first 20 did 11 mortal wounds, so I'm super happy. I'm like, okay, to get to where I need to be, I need to get like half of that with the second 20, and then we're living in the world where I can win this game. And I turbo whiffed on the second half and only got like another 1 or 2, right? So I ended up doing 12 with it. So between that and the Plague Skull and a random smite I threw out, I didn't quite kill the squad. There was only like 3 or 4 of them left, though, but then they swung back and pretty much aced every Poxwalker. So at that moment, I was like, okay, game's over, because I don't have the resources to now dig him off of the middle of the table, and his Apothecary gets to res the squad slowly. back to full. So I killed 22 Terminators, I think, total that game, but he still had quite a few left because of the Apothecary by the end of it. Yeah, it was a tough matchup. I had a chance, but it was a tough matchup, and the dice gods weren't quite in my favor when I needed them to be that game. But I can't really complain. I had a lot of fun. I gotta say, Death Guard are better than I thought they were. So
well, yeah, I mean they're swarming stuff at the moment, especially even here in the UK. They're taking the tournament winners, and sorry, they're throwing on the side you were facing. But you had a similar experience with LVO, am I right? Because you put out that video recently of your wrap up of your experience over the last year and so, and you had, I think the only game you lost from that was against the top player. Was that right?
Jack Harpster, who won the event.
Yeah.
So I was a little bit more upset with that loss than I was with this particular loss. With that loss, we're talking literally like a half inch of movement away from it being a win for me, because essentially one of my activations got messed up. So that was a learning game for me, because if I had been a bit more precise or on the ball about my movement, I would have won that game. I was almost certain of it, because I had set up a play where essentially I was going to ace the Blood Angel Sanguinary Guard squads. I had made one fight last. I was going to activate into another one. But long story short, I made a very small mistake in the minutia of the game, and it cost me the game, which was a very frustrating loss because I knew better. But at this event, I didn't feel like that. I feel like I played every game to the best of my ability. I made some mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes,
does, yeah.
but none of them were so crippling that any single one of them lost me a game. And in the game I lost, I felt like I had put myself in as close a universe as possible to try to win it. So I can't really complain about that portion. I'm very happy with my own play, which is not always the case.
Well, sorry to dig all wounds for that one then. It was just because in that wrap-up video, I saw it come through, and it's like, you had the win, and then lost only that one. It was like, it's a shame, obviously. But I think something that's always, as I said, from that beginning time I saw you hearing about that Zinch list, that's been drawing me to see how you do and watch the Warphammer videos, and then the ones you had on your own channel, which I know you're kind of doing a bit of a crossover between your own and Warphammer ones now. Is your lists are always different. They're always fascinating, and I think one of your videos from last year was when Zinch won again, and you've taken Lord of Change, huge Knight, and a few other big things, and it was just like seeing elements that you could have fun with. And I think that's brilliant. Yeah. So what's your next army you want to take for the next tournament now? You've as you said, you've ticked off all the chaos. Is there something you want to go completely different with, or are you just going back to, but are you leaning back into Be'lakor and kind of his army of renown?
Yeah, without getting too deep into the weeds, because I have a tendency to kind of rabbit trail when I'm talking. But I took a bus up to Cherokee Open with a couple other people from my region, and they were actually making fun of me by the end of it because I was constantly changing what list I wanted to play. There's so many cool things right now in Chaos, and all of them are very reasonable in the current meta. As an example, I really want to play World Eaters. I think World Eaters are fantastic. I like having some big, scary 8-bound push into people's deployment zones. It scratches this almost like reptilian or primal need we have to smack things with big axes, which is awesome. So I wanted to play World Eaters, but then the tricksy mission play, objective-oriented side of me wants to play more of a Alpha Legion list, where I'm all about trying to burn their objectives, which is the coolest secondary in the game. For those that don't know, Alpha Legion's secondary is do an action. I think it's within 6 inches of your opponent's deployment zone. And if you do, you get points. But if it's on an objective, you roll a dice, and on a 4+, they can never hold that objective again.
Oh, I didn't.
And
I haven't read that one.
It's so funny. No one's read it, but if you think about it conceptually, in over half the missions in competitive play, when you get to the table, there is a 25% chance with Alpha Legion that they can't do anything about it, that you burn an objective. And how it works is there's a 50-50 chance that I burn the objective and a 50-50 chance that I win the first turn. And Alpha Legion can put a pregame move on 2 units. So if you have like Raptors or Warp Talons, you can have them pregame move. Then if you go first, move again to get onto the objective and burn it, which is hilarious.
I mean, that just sounds fun. Like,
yeah, and that means that when you get to the table, it's not exactly the same as winning, but that's almost a guaranteed win if it happens.
Yeah.
So it's like a 25% chance just to win, which is crazy. And Alpha Legion have some other cool things going for them. But that was one that has stuck out to me because I think it's very underexplored. I think there was only one real tournament placing for Alpha Legion so far. I think they won like either a larger RT or a GT somewhat recently. And so I want to experiment with Alpha Legion. That's super cool. I want to play World Eaters and put like a bunch of 8-bound in a drop pod in like one of the Dread Claws or something, or even in a drill. Who knows? And the other one that's been sticking out to me again is Disciples of Be'lakor. So Disciples, obviously my favorite sub-faction in the game. Be'lakor is my favorite model in the game. He was my favorite model in the game before he had a new model because I have a lot of old era fantasy Warhammer love for Be'lakor because he was the model that kind of got me into all of Warhammer and mostly starting with fantasy. So I love Be'lakor. I think he's really cool. I love his lore, especially in AOS, and in 40k it's a little bit worse. But so Disciples sticks out to me both because I have a ton of practice with it. I think it's unironically very good, and I was very inspired. So I got to hand it to my round 4 opponent who I mentioned, who's playing that demon list, because he was playing Disciples, and he had a very different list than the ones that I had been running. But it was like this moment of inspiration for me where I was seeing all these little pieces he put in his list, and I don't want to play his exact list, but I want to cut a few pieces here and there from it and merge it with what I'd been experimenting with to make something that I think is much better, because there was a few matchups I was really struggling into that he had found solutions for. So I was like, whoa. So after our game, him and I actually spent a lot of time talking together, kind of brewing up a new Disciples list that really got me back in the saddle, so to speak. Like, I really want to go out and play that faction again. I kind of feel like I've reinvigorated my love for it. So
that's great.
I think it's great too, because it makes me happy. I like putting those models on the table. And so I think that moving forward, I'm going to at least at one upcoming event, try them out again and see how I feel. So
your lists always have great names for your characters, and I know that in the past you've created almost like movie poster type style things. When did that start? What's inspired you for the names?
So I've only been a competitive player for about like a year and a half in my estimation. For a very long time, I've always been a narrative player. And interestingly enough, Mike from Warphammer, he also does the same thing with his lists. Oh, cool. And I've done it for a while, but I'd kind of gotten away from it going into 9th edition. And then I saw Mike post a list where he had names on his guys. He's like, you know what? I want to do that again. So I got way back into it. I always write like pages of lore for every list I make. I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, I think I'm more of a narrative player than a competitive player, because I will not play lists that don't satisfy some kind of like aesthetic for me. I mean, again, putting a Terrax in my army was not, there's like rules justification for it. It wasn't so bad that I couldn't bring it, but it was like, it fit the theme that I was doing. It looked nice, and I just like love the concept of it in relation to the characters I made. So I highly recommend, if you don't prescribe lore to your list, to at least start trying to do it, because it makes you feel a lot more connected to your characters. I never forgot my characters' names at Cherokee. I want to say that.
That's great.
That stands out for me. So I was always able to point at Mamon and say, oh, that's Corum the Devourer, and so on and so forth, which adds a lot of spice to the game as well, because most people find that at least funny.
With 10th coming round and rumoured to potentially even be out in June now, Do you think there's going to be any chance that GW are going to go, right, we'll put Death Guard out with Nurgle in a book and Sons with Zinch in a book, that kind of thing? Or do you think they're still going to keep it quite separated?
I think we're going to move to more of a warband style of approach, which is something we've seen with like Agents of Chaos and whatnot. I would be very not surprised if they just did grand allegiances for each faction, and then you just kind of got to soup it from there. So we'll see what they decide to do, but I feel like with how they've done Agents, they're kind of going back closer towards the old era of, hey, here's a big table of different alliances you can draw from each of these alliances. I don't think they'll ever let us do anything crazy like in the 7th edition era, we could just take Riptides with our Astra Militarum because we wanted to. I don't think they'll let us do that, but I think they're moving more in the direction of like, okay, Chaos, you can mess around with all the Chaos guys. So we'll see. There's been some exceptions to that rule. I'm not sure what direction they're going. I do think Chaos, like from its inception, from its 2nd edition book to today, they have always been about like a war band. It's some Chaos champion getting a bunch of different people and monsters and stuff together and smashing at people, and that's cool. I like that.
I asked a couple of friends about if they had any kind of questions for you, because they all follow your stuff, and one of them did say, how would you make I don't know the answer to this, but how would you make a thematic Sons of Malice list that doesn't just die to everything?
So let me take a look at Sons of Malice. I'm familiar with the name, but not super deep into the lore.
No, that's all good.
Okay, so I need to do a more in-depth lore dive.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, I mean, like, forge your own narrative here. I mean, looking at it, it does sound like it's a renegade chapter, and I mean, that's a good start. Think of what chapter trait or legion trait you think best fits kind of their play style, and all of them are very legitimate. All of them have play. So if you're looking at, like, for instance, a chapter that's very about their chaos cultists as an example, you can find a build that works for that. I would argue that almost every army and sub-faction, if built in specific ways, can have positive outcomes for you at the table, especially if you practice it. So forge your narrative, have fun with it. If you build it just for the fluff and it's not working out, then consider retooling it a little bit. But I like I said, when I build a list, I always start with a concept that is a good concept, and then I add stuff from there. And sometimes the stuff I add is a little bit too silly or whatever, but I mean, that's part of playing the game. You need to enjoy the models that you have, and if you don't, then I don't think you'll get the same experience out of playing it. So
you are well known further throughout the community for being one of the first people to kind of reveal some of the chaos pieces that came out before the codex. So I was just curious, in kind of more depth kind of thing, has there been a huge amount of backlash from people, or is it kind of been a generalized more love from seeing that stuff coming out? How's that affected you? And even today, you still kind of recognized for being that face?
Yeah, so a lot of people will approach you if you have a platform that have information to share. So really, the simplest way of putting it is, if you have a platform and somebody wants to share information and they don't know how to share it themselves, they'll share it with you and ask you to share it. And so a lot of my leaks do come from a variety of different sources, which is nice, because I think it keeps the people that want to share that information a bit more safe, which is good. So I haven't had any pushback from anyone that shared information from me, which is thankful. Mm-hmm. But from the community at large, you get a mix. Like, some people really do believe that leakers or people that leak this information are like bad for the hobby, in that they're bad for people that have early access information. It like disincentivizes them to be a part of the GW program under the NDA. It disincentivizes GW to look outside of themselves for feedback on like new rules or playtesting. And I do think that leaking did kill the playtest program. But part of why I never shared any leaks up until the Demon Codex was, one, I felt like other people had it handled and I didn't really have any platform in the space. And two, because I didn't want to do anything to hurt anyone that had a active career in that information. So really basically, I did not leak anything until after people had been fired from the playtest program. And it was clear that they were no longer wanting to do that. So there was some people that gave me pushback because they thought that I was doing damage to the hobby. And to some degrees, I think they're probably right from GW's perspective. But I also feel like GW does not make good use of building hype for their codexes and new releases. The single Warphammer articles they put out are okay, but I feel like it should be more of an open information type of rule sharing experience. And I think people like having something to talk about. I
think sometimes the leaks actually benefit them, arguably. I mean, because they get an instant reaction of what people's thoughts are. Because remember, one of the early ones that came out was that they were going to limit it to one greater demon per detachment, and there was a lot of pushback on that. And there's a feeling, that maybe they heard that and said, okay, we'll take that out. So if they didn't have those leaks to do those elements, then
I mean, it's plausible. The community for Warhammer, in terms of its online community, is small. And I know for almost a fact that GW is aware that leaks were out and that their reception to them. I can't necessarily say somebody at GW is hitting refresh on my YouTube channel or anything like that. I don't think that's the case. But they are aware when leaks do come out. And we have a really good example of that, which is the leaks that they take very seriously. I actually don't think they take rules leaks super seriously unless somebody is doing it very blatantly that's under NDA, and we have examples of that. But anytime there's a leak of a model, like a grainy picture or whatever, they freak out. And that's because that is more directly damaging their IP or their product release, because it makes the model look bad or whatever. So like when Angron's picture first leaked, they freaked out. They did a video. It was very clear that was a super quick response to the Angron leak, because they felt like it was bad for their IP to have like grainy images of him on the back of cardboard boxes out there. So I don't know. It's complicated. I will say I've never had somebody who I've known in real life express concern with me over leaking anything. It's always been, stray comments here and there on Reddit or Facebook or Discord or whatever. And honestly, I just don't really pay any heed to that anyways, because it doesn't super impact my my life.
No, that's good.
Overall,
I got to play the YouTuber Mordian Glory a little while ago in Nottingham, and he was helped reveal a few of the guard leaks, and so I got to talk to him about that as well, and he said very similar thing to you, and that some people were hating it, some people loved it, but I think in his mind he didn't care about GW in that sense. He was excited to have this information and really wanted to just let people know that these things were out. So I think there's a passion behind it as well, because you want to talk about it, and you have that experience with the hobby where you want people to know and join in the fun with you. So
I was pretty tactical about the demon leaks that I shared, in that I wanted them mostly to just get people excited about the new book. The main reason I actually started sharing them, because before I made a video, I was sharing some of them in Discord, was because of how there was kind of this lull in things to talk about for a period of time in the space, and most of the people who were on the demons discords and stuff were pretty bummed out about not knowing when they would get a new book. Like, people thought it would take years for them to get a new book. Like, people and I just wanted to be like, hey, it's actually kind of coming, and here's some of the cool information about it, more to get people excited and chatting about it, and it had that effect. So the intended effect was reached. The whole YouTube channel side of things actually got added on to that. I thought that would be my last video on the subject, but I had enough of positive response and people reaching out and saying that they really liked it or wanted to know more, that's kind of what got me into starting to make video content as opposed to just written stuff.
Absolutely. So I suppose in that sense now you've got the Warphammer as the YouTube that you're kind of still working with. Are you still doing your own one as well, or is it much more of a focus onto the Warp side now?
So I fused pretty much my personal brand with Warphammer. The only reason I had separated that out to begin with was because I did not want in any conceivable way Mike to be tied to the leaks that I was giving out, because Mike doesn't leak anything. Mike is very much a keeper of secrets when it comes to the way he shares information, which I think is good. And so I didn't want any of that to reflect negatively onto him. So I wanted to kind of separate the channel from his main channel so that the brands were kind of separate. But as time has gone on, we've realized that's actually not that big of a deal. People know that we're different voices in the space, and so we've decided to merge the two back together. I consider Mike to be kind of like the head honcho of Warphammer because he started it, founded it, whatever. I'm helping with the content and with the competitive side in going out and putting in additional points for events so that Warphammer as a team succeeds competitively, along with Mike, as well as making additional content to get people to go to the site. I think Mike is actually one of the best writers in 40K, period. Outside of like Black Library lore writers. I mean, for people that are writing content about the game, I think he is legitimately the best. And
the website is brilliant. It's a brilliant read. And then, that's how I first discovered yourself and him, is reading that content, learning a bit more, and then with the video interviews as well. It was super exciting.
Right, and anytime I can get people to traffic to the channel or whatever, I'm just hoping that they find something that they're super excited about. So we've gotten a lot of good responses. For instance, which is one of the things that I used personally when I was prepping my Death Guard list, was what Mike had written about Death Guard. So it's pretty cool to have access to something like that, because in my earlier days of Warhammer, if you wanted to figure something out, you had to either talk to people that were in the know about a faction, or you had to read your book. And it's nice to have packageable information, especially with how quickly rules tend to change in the game.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Wallace. I really appreciate you joining me for this. I'll send people to Warphammer and then that original video and your most recent one. Is there any other kind of things you wanted people to know about, if there is anyone that's going to find this video?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I appreciate anyone that reaches out. I'll definitely watch this video when it's released, or take a listen. I guess my last little plug is that next month, on the 18th of March, I will be doing Warhammer's first ever official event at Tables of Towers here in Maryland. It's called the Great Game. Yeah, it's the Great Game Grand Tournament. It's a lot of G's. It's the GGGT. But the Great Game Grand Tournament is a chaos-focused tournament. And we'll be doing live coverage on it that you can access through the Warphammer YouTube channel. That'll be probably streaming it cross-platform for people. But we will have the top tables at that event live streamed, and it is Chaos themed, so we expect there to be quite a few Chaos factions on show at the event. Not only will it be streamed, but Mike will be there doing live commentary for every game.
Oh, awesome.
So we're super excited about it. It's going to be a lot of fun. So if you do listen to this and you like Chaos stuff, which I know you do, you should be prepared for that. Take a look at that and pop by the YouTube channel. So
that's amazing. Thank you so much, Wallace. Really appreciate it. Thanks again, Wallace. And honestly, it's an honor to meet you. Like for me, it's like there's names in the community that stand out, and you're definitely one of them. So I'm so excited to see where your kind of Warhammer career continues to go. So
I appreciate you. Thanks for reaching out. You have a good rest of your day, buddy.
Thanks, mate. Same to you. Bye.
Thanks for joining for this. I'll be back again soon with another interview. If there's anyone particularly you want to hear from, let me know, and I'll try and reach out to them and get involved and see what they have to say and pass on any questions you have to them as well. Have a great one. See you next time. Bye. Outside.